Alrighty, so we've talked about Fury. Now, let's talk about our boy Arms. Because as a DPS warrior, I feel it's good if you're able to play and should be able to play both. Um, Now, before we get into how it plays and what the ideas are and how good it is, in terms of raw numbers, I don't fucking know. Um, Realistically, we have to put the potential ideas and have them programmed and have them set up correctly and put into a robot, and then the robot will tell us the numbers. As far as the we of that, not me, somebody else, someone who's actually good at that. I don't know what I'm fucking doing with sim bots and shit like that. I will leave that to the math people. They can keep doing that. But for now, let's talk a little bit about ARMS. I want to go over the couple updates that they brought up recently. And let's talk about the first one, which is a 6% aura buff, right? They buffed the entire class by 6%, all ability 6%. Nothing really to talk about. That's just what it is, right? So they buffed it by 6%. The next change was that they made, well, the change before this, technically, but the major change to it is Ignore Pain is no longer allowed to contribute towards Test of Might. We used Ignore Pain in Colossus Smash Windows because we had a Rage excess and weren't really able to benefit from something like Heal by Violence. Well, I mean, we're benefiting from it, but it's basically, hey man, do you want to do more damage or less damage? Obviously, more damage. But the playstyle was admittedly somewhat degenerate. It is possible we will continue to use Ignore Pain, especially on damage-heavy fights, because it is a fairly good just general mitigation, depending on the mechanic. So it is possible this will still be used, but for most players, they'll probably throw it right back to Fueled by Violence. They'll never think about Ignore Pain again, and they probably don't want to think about Ignore Pain ever again, because it was a degenerate playstyle, technically. It was very weird. The next change that they made was to Battle Lord. Currently on live servers, when your Overpower resets your Mortal Strike, Battle Lord gives you a 10% rage negative, so resets the cooldown and lets you cast a Mortal Strike at 20 rage. For something like PvP, cool. For PvE, especially because we run Test of Might, this was a problem. Once again, we are using abilities, we already have too much rage, and Test of Might only works on rage that is spent. So they said, okay, you know what, that is working against itself. The design is working against itself, and that's a problem. So let's change it. Now Battlelord does the same thing, except when you cast Mortal Strike, after it's been reset by Overpower, you get the buff, you spend Battlelord, and it just generates 10 rage instead. Because what people were doing to get around this, because we already have enough rage, people were running a cancel or a macro into their Battlelord, which means that you would reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike, you would cancel the rage reduction, so it would go back to 30 rage, and then that 30 rage Mortal Strike, instead of 20, feeds into Test of Might, while losing the negative 10 rage. So they're like, you know what, this doesn't make sense, it's not working how we want it to. We want it to work this way, and to fix that, we're just going to make Battlelord give you plus 10 rage whenever you cast Mortal Strike after resetting it. So, cool. It's a change that works towards Test of Might, it works towards the class working better. Cool. But we still have a pretty big problem. Actually, no, let me go through the last week's changes, then I'll talk about ARMS as a whole, because it's important to lay the groundwork for everything, right? So, recently, the most recent change was that Mortal Strike and Overpower were both given a 10% damage buff. That comes to, like, let's take... Do I still have that thing up? No, I don't. So, I'll just pull out my example again. Here's my example. You go to Warcraft logs. Let's go to Magmarax, because I choose Magmarax as my... If I'm looking at builds or logs, I like to look at it as my single target build, since there's so much uptime compared to other things. Let's look at this log here, right? One thing I don't know for certain is whether or not the buff to Overpower also buffs Dreadnought. I don't think it does, but I'm not 100% sure, so I can't say. I can probably just ask somebody, and should have known this. So once the video's over, I'll ask someone. But essentially what this is you can see 23%, say 13%, that is 30, let's say 36%, right? A 10% buff to both of these is about a 3.6 DPS gain, right? Which essentially makes up for the fact that the amount of damage Ignore Pain was giving us was about 2 to 3%. For the average player, you're going to get about 2 to 3% overall damage worth of that buff to Mortal Strike and Overpower. So it just makes up for the Battlelord nerf, or it makes up for the Overpower nerf. But I do think it actually brings up a problem that ARMS is having, especially an Overpower problem. Because think about Overpower. Look at the abilities we have for it. Overpower increases MS damage, which is our primary damage function. Overpower is increased by 15%. Overpower gets Dreadnought and a second charge. Overpower deals 35% increased damage. Overpower has 10% increased crit chance and deals 10% increased crit damage on enemies below 35%. And it does that base, and on enemies below 35%, Overpower generates 8 rage. Overpower is a crazy strong button. This button that costs 0 rage on a rage-based class is insane as a button. It is so good that on that log I previously showed you, it does as much damage as Execute does. And that's kind of fucking wild. And it just got buffed again. So on a log that we just looked at, Overpower might be doing more damage than Execute. It would be their number 2. And it's an ability that costs no rage. It's fucking insane, right? An insane ability. So because Overpower is so damn good, it becomes a problem when we start looking at things like Test of Might. And because of our tier set, Test of Might's also a problem. Our tier set is increasing Ren damage, and sudden death can be triggered by Ren's bleed damage. And the 4 set is sudden death also makes your next execute powerfully slam the ground, doing a thunderclap and bleeding for the 50% of the damage. If the bleed's reapplied, remaining damage is added to the new bleed. That's really good. That's pretty damn good, right? But sudden death doesn't cost rage. It doesn't cost rage. It doesn't spend rage. It completely doesn't work with Test of Might. And now we're going to be getting more sudden death procs than we were getting before because of the 2 set. So our class is entirely built around sudden death, just like the Fury Warrior tier set in Vault of the Incarnates was built around proccing sudden death more. But it doesn't fucking work with our main ability, or our honestly one of the big capstones that gives us a lot of damage. This isn't a capstone. The capstones are down here. But this really influences your class. Because of this, there has been talk. I don't know whether or not that talk has any fruit to it, any validity to it. But some people have speculated potentially In for the Kill might be better than Test of Might. Because realistically, Overpower does a crazy amount of damage. We're going to be sending a lot of sudden death executes. And because our sudden death does not go up to 2 charges, you only get the 1 charge, and both of these this sudden death charge and this sudden death charge I think can proc or have different proc rates between them. So you can essentially, if you don't spend sudden death quick enough, you will just lose a charge of this, which is a DPS loss for sure. And because sudden death costs no rage, with Test of Might, this is obviously going to be a significant issue, since we're going to be essentially hitting a lot of buttons that don't spend rage in a rage-spending-centric talent. So because of this, there has been talk of In for the Kill potentially being better, but like I said before, all of this needs to be finalized, it needs to be put in the robot, and then the robot needs to tell us the numbies, right? We just need the numbies from the robot after it has been programmed correctly so we know what's right and wrong, because the robot is good at math. We can give it priorities, we can do this, we can do that, but the robot will tell us what's good. There can be user input error that makes the robot incorrect, but those are generally found by people that are way more interested in that thing and fix them. So right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, and this In for the Kill change is just big speculation. The one reason why I think it's probably not going to be what we play, and it's probably still going to be Test of Might, is especially in a progression setting, execute damage is important. Execute damage has always been important. Arms is still the king of execute damage, right? And because of that, even though we're getting a bunch of Test of Might procs, or sudden death procs, we're sending so many executes in execute phase that I'm pretty sure Test of Might will do more damage in execute phase than in for the kill. In for the kill might do more damage throughout the regular phase of the boss, but if execute's what's actually mattering in a progression setting, you're going to be running this over in for the kill. But that is 100% down to the robot. What the robot says, we can tell it to be an execute phase, so we're just in a holding pattern on that. Realistically, what I think needs to happen, since in for the kill is definitely way better paired with something like Warbringer and doing Mythic Plus and AoE and that kind of thing, is that sudden death, because just read it. Your attacks have a chance to make your next execute cost no rage, be usable on any target regardless of health, and deal damage as if you spent 40 rage. All they need to do is make the rage spent from sudden death procs count as 40 rage towards Test of Might, and it fixes that entirely. The entire class tier, all of that built around sudden death is completely fixed. I mean, not necessarily completely fixed. We still don't have an actual rage spender, but in terms of how it gameplay feel and feeling bad about having to press execute, like, think about that. You feel bad to press execute on an enemy target because Test of Might gets no benefit from it. If they make the change that 40 rage that the 40 rage spent, which is spent, right? If they change that, or that work, the sudden death procs work with Test of Might, completely makes it feel way better. You want to hit the button. The tier set is based around the button. It would be a great fix. It would obviously buff our damage overall because it's working into Test of Might. And then, hey, maybe we need to get tuned because of that if it's too strong, but I would rather it be that and then we get tuned because it's too strong than having a button that feels bad to press that your entire tier set is based around. So that's kind of what we're looking at for Arms Warrior. The class still kind of doesn't really... It kind of works against itself in various aspects. Excuse me, especially in our Colossus Smash windows, we will still have more rage than ever to spend, and outside of execute, nothing to spend it on. They buffed Slam to try and get us to play more Slam, but even then, realistically, let's take this right here. We'll pull our talents up. We need to put Slam on our bars so we can directly calculate the difference. We'll just put it here, right? We'll put it right next to Rend. Currently, as it stands, on application, Rend does 15.6k. Slam does 12.9. So, to make Slam do more damage, we would have to, let's say we'd have to take a point out of... This is where we're already having a problem. We would maybe take a point out of here instead of, because if our rage bar is cosmetic anyway, having a bunch of additional rage doesn't really matter. But because we need multiple points to be able to progress past this tier here, to be able to progress into here at all, we need 2 points to unlock any of it. So we'll put that there, and then we'll put this here. And that's what it could be. But because if we're already pushing Slam, is improved Slam worth it? But the realistic issue is we don't have enough points to do this, right? Both getting to our capstones here are gated by 2 points here. 2 points here, 2 points here. You can technically get to this bottom part of the tree with 1 point in Valor for Victory, but the issue then begins, you have no Battle Lord and no Juggernaut, which are both massive DPS loss. So obviously we're not going to take those. So we lose defensive capability, right? We lose 15 rage as a max bonus. And with taking 2 points, Slam now does more damage than Rend. But that requires a 2-point investment the removal of pain and gain and loss of 15 max rage. It's just not working with itself, man. I don't know whether or not our point economy needs looked at. Like, I don't know whether or not is it worth it? I don't think it's worth it to take a point out of this because we have an execute-centered tier, so just losing 5% crit damage on execute is bad, right? So we're not going to take a point out of this to put it here. So then we put this back here. And pain and gain's actually pretty good. I mean, potentially we can get rid of honed reflexes and run this instead. But once again, if there's ever a situation where we're not getting tactician procs for whatever reason, honed reflexes just as a general reduction is pretty good. But arms as a whole, just it kind of seems to work against itself a little bit, right? The big talents don't work correctly with everything else. They've adjusted this one, but this one still doesn't work. And they're trying to push Slam as a spender, but realistically, the issue is even if Slam does more damage than Rend with 2 talent points worth of investment, by the way. So even if this does more damage, how many points? Let's just check. How many points is it? If we only put 1 point in, so we can keep this and pain and gain. It does barely more damage than Slam. But the realistic issue is that the only reason we would be pressing Rend or Slam anyway is because we're in a test of might window, and Whirlwind is on cooldown and Thunderclap is on cooldown. The problem is that the spender doesn't spend enough. It just doesn't spend enough. If they wanted to make this talent improve Slam, cost additional rage, but do additional damage, it would make this far more valuable a point, and potentially, well, I don't know if Bloodborne actually affects the tier set bleed, but it might make it an actual valuable point to look into, right? Just as a actual rage spender in these CS windows. But right now, it still feels kind of weird. It still feels kind of clunky. Fury is doing definitely a little better as far as like play style. But right now, in terms of even just trying to build your character specifically for a single target, you lose a decent bit. You lose home reflexes, you might lose pain and gain, you might lose max rage. So we just got problems, man. We just got problems. And that also, oh, actually, no, another point investment here. So Slam already has an increase, so it's normally 20 rage. But this buffs it. This buffs our Whirlwind rage spend. It's close, man. It's close. But right now, especially because our tier set's centered around sudden death, and sudden death doesn't work with tested might, it just doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel good, man. So I really hope they look into changing this sudden death to work with test of might, like make it as if it costs 40 rage. Arms also has another issue, which is kind of weird. I wonder if I can show it to you. If this dummy is low enough health, I can show it to you. Where he's not. Is there? I mean, I can get a proc and then I'll show it to you, right? Sorry if you hear. Here, I need to turn this down. You might have been hearing feedback there. But let's get it sudden death proc, and then we will go through it. Okay, we have sudden death proc. This is max melee range. If I exit range, sudden death, it doesn't go off. It doesn't do anything. If you leave, because this button has a delay, when you leave the range, it doesn't consume, it doesn't hit, it doesn't deal damage, it doesn't do anything. That time I stayed too close. But if you have mobs moving or you need to move, one of the main issues with this button is that it just doesn't do its damage instantly. Something else to consider is when you do get a sudden death proc, look how long it takes to go off. Press.
I'm out of range.
Press. You have the wind up. Once that hits, that's when your sudden death actually deals damage. That's why you can hit your execute button and it cancels itself if you turn around or go out of range or anything like that. This is terrible. It feels terrible, man. But they can keep the animation, they can keep the sound just in the background or something. I don't know. When we hit the sudden death, when we hit the execute button, just let it hit instantly and do damage instantly. There's also a potential damage loss because the sudden death of the 2-piece and the sudden death that you're getting from your talent tree here, it is possible while you're casting sudden death in that G-burn section, while you're casting this, it is possible to get another sudden death proc that will then overwrite and consume itself, so you essentially just lost an entire sudden death proc because of that delay. And if sudden death stacked to 2 times, or this buff was potentially something completely different, I think that might be able to fix the ability for sudden death to actually be a bit nicer. Maybe letting it stack to 2 times would be better, just so you're not losing one potentially, because that sucks. But once again, it's just another one of those things that make the class feel weird and kind of clunky to play and kind of work against itself. It's close. It just needs a little more work to really get that feel right. So I really hope they make some of those changes. I'm not really sure. There's other things they could potentially do, which I'm not like really thinking about or considering right now. But I really do hope that they fix how ARMS feels to play, because you don't want to have to feel bad hitting execute. It just doesn't make any sense, right? But that's my thoughts on where it stands right now. There could be patch notes tomorrow or the day after that could be fixing all of these things. You never know. They could be fixed tomorrow. That would be sick. But the patch is coming up soon, and there's less and less time to fix the issues. And hopefully they do. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. Peace.